Well, thanks for meeting with me, Senator Santorum.
Thank you very much, Shane.
You just released a tax policy, and I wanted to ask you, how does this differ from some of the other plans? What makes yours unique?
Well, let me see. Number one, it is incredibly pro-growth. I think other candidates' plans have similar growth numbers, but ours differentiates in a couple of very significant ways. Number one, it's the most fiscally responsible one. In other words, if you look at the fact that we repeal pretty much all the deductions, all the exemptions, everything goes away. We lower rates, which is what everyone always talks about doing. Lower rates, get rid of the complexity, stimulate growth, and do it in a way that doesn't explode the budget deficit, which is really a big concern to many Republicans, including me. And by getting rid of Obamacare taxes and Obamacare, in conjunction with this tax plan, it actually, over a 10-year period of time, according to the Tax Foundation, actually is revenue positive. It actually generates more revenue because of the growth, the tremendous growth it creates. It generates positive revenue, so it's fiscally responsible. None of the other plans are even close. I mean, Trump, Jindal just explode the deficit in particularly, well, right from the start, like $1 trillion a year in increased deficits. The big differentiator is ours is really strongly pro-manufacturing.
Okay.
We have our corporate provisions allow for full expensing, which is very, very important for manufacturing. We have a repatriation provision, which brings previously untaxed money that's sitting overseas into this country to be invested primarily by manufacturers in manufacturing. And we provide a 2-year transition for all manufacturers, where the first year there's a 0 corporate tax, second year 10%, third year up to 20% like everybody else. So we provide a great incentive for taking that money from overseas, bringing it back here and investing it so they can use it profitably here in America. Finally, it's very pro-family. We take the tax code, which has over time reduced the amount of support that the code provided for children, and ramp it right back up to a very strong level. We have a 20% flat rate, but we have instead of the standard deduction, we have a per person tax credit.
Okay.
So every person in the family gets a $2,750 tax credit. So a family of 4 would have an $11,000 tax credit. Now, to explain what that means is, that means the first $11,000 you owe in taxes, you don't have to pay.
Right.
So if you're a $50,000 wage earner, your tax is 20%, which is $10,000, but your tax credit's $11,000. So you wouldn't have to pay. You'd get the $10,000 that you paid and you're withholding back, and you'd get a $1,000 check from the government. So it's a refundable tax credit. So that's number one. So and we treat, unlike the previous tax code, we treat adults the same as children. Children get the same full $2,750 tax credit as adults do. In addition, we have the child credit.
Okay.
So we keep the child credit and the per person credit. So it's a very, very strong pro-family approach. The other two things we do, the only other two provisions we keep, we basically explode the code, get rid of the current tax code, and all 1 million words of it, which is actually more than the Bible.
Right.
And we replace it with these 2 credits and 2 deductions. The one deduction is on charities, and unlike before, where 2/3 of the American public couldn't deduct their charitable contributions, now everybody can.
Okay.
So it allows for deductibility of all charitable contributions, and second, it allows for deductibility of home interest. So that's...
Is there any cap on that? I've seen some plans.
$25,000 cap. So give you an idea, if you went out and bought an $800,000 home, you'd be fine. If you bought something over $800,000, you're going to be limited to only $25,000 in interest deduction. So just give you an idea of what that would be.
Okay. And does your plan touch payroll taxes at all?
We don't touch payroll taxes. We get rid of the again in the individual. We get rid of alternative minimum tax. We get rid of again all the special provisions in the income tax code. we get rid of deductibility of state and local taxes because we think that's just I think that's a subsidy for the high tax states,
right.
Low tax states. And the corporate taxes, we get rid of every special tax provision. I know a lot of folks here in Iowa say, oh, the oil industry gets the oil depletion allowance. No more. No depreciation schedules, no amortization schedules. Everything's expensed. And so whether you're a corn grower or an ethanol producer or whether you're an oil producer, you expense everything you spend in producing that inventory. So it's a very powerful tool for production, and it treats all industries the same.
Okay, 20%. How do you get to that number?
Came with 20%, looking at the fact that America historically has spent since World War II, has spent between 18 and 22% of GDP on government.
Okay.
The sweet spot that most Republicans like to focus on is that 18%, because that's the sort of the lowest level that we have been at during the post-war time. And so in thinking about, well, how am I going to get to 18% of GDP? Because that's where most people think, that's going to constrain government. Well, if you have a tax below 18%, you're not going to get to 18% if you have any deductions or any credits or anything like that. If you have 19%, well, again, if you're going to make sure that lower income families and families are not going to be paying more taxes than they're paying now. So it's a combination of finding the low enough rate to make sure that we weren't going to increase taxes on folks today who are not paying, not paying federal taxes or not paying much in federal taxes. So it was a combination of looking at what we needed to fund the government and at the same time not increase taxes on folks.
Now, there's a certain campaign, I was going to say, should go nameless, but I'll actually name it. Huckabee campaign. They're spouting they're pushing the fair tax. Why not the fair tax?
If I were starting all over in 1916 and saying, before the income tax was around, and saying that we needed a tax system that that was the most efficient way to collect revenue and didn't incentivize spending, but incentivized earnings and investment. That sales tax, a national sales tax, a value-added tax, a fair tax, whatever you want to call it, all those things would have been on the table. The problem is we have an income tax, and we have a 16th Amendment that allows for an income tax. And if we get rid of the income tax and replace it with a sales tax, the income tax is still there to come back. And I have absolutely no doubt, zero doubt, that if we do a sales tax, the argument's going to be made at some point, well, the rich are not paying their
fair share
because the sales tax is on everybody.
You don't have faith in Congress that they'll do the right thing and not bring it back?
I have faith that the next Democratic administration will say, we only need an income tax on the wealthiest to make sure that it's being treated fairly, that they're paying their fair share, which is exactly how the income tax was sold back in the 19-teens, that it was only going to be on the wealthiest Americans. Well, we now know how that turned out. And so what I think would happen with a fair tax, we'd have a fair tax and an income tax. And I know a lot of the fair tax pros said, well, we're going to repeal the 16th Amendment. I think the likelihood, I think repealing the income tax is going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. There are a lot of states that simply will not go along with it, and the process would be a long one. And I'm looking for a tax plan that approximates the idea of a fair tax, and that's a flat tax. I mean, a flat tax is with very limited deductions is in a sense almost the same thing as a sales tax. Except it taxes all income, including wealthiers. Because of course, if a sales tax, wealthy do not spend anywhere as near as much of their money on spend it. They invest it.
Right.
So they're going to pay a lot less under a sales tax than they would under an income tax. So this is in a sense a fair tax, but taxing higher income people more than a sales tax would tax them.
Okay. As far as stimulating the economy and supporting your this campaign, you've been really focused on working class Americans, blue collar conservatives, and you put forth basically you look at a minimum wage increase. That's not necessarily a popular idea with people I've talked with. Why not just leave that to the states?
Well, here's what I would say, that one of the things I learned in the process of working in Washington is if you want to get big ideas passed, you're going to have to work together to get those passed, and you're going to have to find some people on the other side of the aisle who are going to have to join you in getting your big ideas done. Whether it was welfare reform, where we got a whole bunch of Democrats to join us, whether it was on some of our national security measures, where I got a whole bunch of Democrats to join us. And these were all things that conservatives now say were some of the greatest victories we ever had. But they had things in there that conservatives, if they knew they were in there, say, oh, why did you support that? Well, because that was necessary in order to get the things that you really like. And you know what that word is called? Compromise. And here's what I learned. There are good compromises and bad compromises. Good compromises is getting less of a good thing. Bad compromises is negotiating away less of a bad thing. It's still a bad thing. You don't do it.
Right.
But if you can get a good thing done by doing some things that are maybe not that make it less good, but still good, you do it.
Right.
And so part of the whole idea of going out and talking about a pro-worker, pro-manufacturing plan is you have to look at things that will help bring people who agree with that idea. And there are many Democrats who are from manufacturing states who would love to support something that's going to increase wages, create more opportunities for people to make things here in America. Senators from Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and places like that. You need to look at things like the minimum wage. And you say, well, that's not a conservative principle. Well, neither is tax credits for businesses.
Right.
But we do that, and I don't know too many Republicans who have a problem with that. We have an R&D tax credit, and every Republican I know, oh, we support the R&D tax credit. Wait a minute, that isn't conservative economics. Well, but it helps business, helps growth. Oh, it's okay for the federal government to get involved and help a business.
Yeah.
It's not okay to provide some minimum standard for employment for workers.
Right.
And that's the tone deaf. That's why, and again, Republicans don't even understand this. It doesn't penetrate. That's why they think you care more about business than you care about workers, because when it comes to anything that provides some sort of help and assistance for workers, it's bad for the economy, it's going to hurt this, it's going to hurt that. If it's for a business, oh, well, it's good for the economy because it's going to help business. And we've seen bailouts, we've seen Republican involved in a whole bunch of things, of which a lot of them I was certainly in that sort of bailouts I was not involved in. But then they do something about increasing minimum wage by 50%. All of a sudden you become Adam Smith and you're saying, oh, well, the invisible hand and we shouldn't be involved in any of this. You can't. If you do that, it just proves the point to folks who are working Americans that you simply care more about these folks than you care about me. And what I'm proposing is not a minimum wage like Obama's proposing. That I absolutely would vote against that, would never sign something like that. But less than 1% of Americans make the minimum wage.
Right.
So in a sense, we really don't have a minimum wage in America.
So for our readers that may not be aware what your minimum wage plan
It's
is.
50 cents an hour per year for 3 years.
Okay.
So it's taking the minimum wage to $7.25 to $8.75 an hour over a 3-year period of time.
The states could obviously do more if they want.
States have done more.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that minimum wage is nobody's making the minimum wage anymore, because
Right.
most states have already raised the minimum wage. And so the idea to have a federal minimum wage that is truly a minimum wage, if less than 1% of the workers in this country are making minimum wage, it's not a minimum wage anymore. I mean, it's hit the floor. And so historically, the federal minimum wages range between 5 and 9% of all wage earners. My increase would put it to about 4 to 5%. So it still would be below the historical average, but it is something to put on your plan and to put in a vision that says, we understand that workers need to have protections just like businesses need to have opportunities, and so that's number one. I mean, I'll use another one, controversial, the Import-Export Bank.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a supporter of the Import-Export Bank, and the reason I am is because I believe the role of the federal government is to create a level playing field for our businesses to be able to compete with other businesses around the world, particularly when it comes to manufacturing, which is a globally competitive marketplace. Okay? 62 other countries have export financing. The United States is one of the smallest, is the smallest of the major exporters. Yet it's critical for some of our bigger projects to be able to get that export financing. We've seen since the XM Bank has been shut down that we've lost thousands of jobs already. And here's the interesting thing. Those jobs went overseas. They were actually moved. The company that was bidding on those projects for workers here in America, still getting the bid, but they're using workers in other countries. So the idea this is corporate welfare, well, if it was corporate welfare, GE would be hurt.
Right.
But GE isn't hurt. Who's hurt are the workers in South Carolina who lost their job, or the workers in Texas who lost their jobs. That's what people don't understand, is that if you don't have the same tools in the shed that, and particularly since Dodd-Frank, banks aren't lending because of the liability that Dodd-Frank imposes on them. Banks aren't lending for this type of financing for export products. And so it's going to hurt American workers. And according to, again, it depends who you believe, I guess. Some say it costs a little money. Most of the folks who look at this say the Export-Import Bank actually makes money. So it's not adding to the deficit. It's providing a necessary tool. And again, it's consistent with the message. I want to make America the number one manufacturer in the world. I want to make sure that we have jobs here in this country that employ people. And if you put things like that in a package that says we're going to be the number one manufacturer, all of a sudden you've got folks on the other side of the aisle saying, you know what? You know, he's actually trying to reach out and trying to pull people together to see if we can actually get something done to move this country forward.
Have you seen any movement with people who may not necessarily be a friend of Republicans respond to your message?
Well, I mean, obviously, I just introduced it a couple of days ago. So, and I have.
Well, you've been talking about blue collar conservatives,
and I can tell you this: that when I go on shows that you know on MSNBC and the thing, one of the most constant things is, look, you're for the American woman. They concede it. They said, look, we understand you're not like the other guy. You actually do care about workers, and you get that start. You start to get that concession. Then you open up opportunities. So the answer is, look, I wrote a book called Blue Collar Conservative. I had a very famous Democratic politician who will go nameless because it wouldn't help me if you knew who he was. Called me after that book came out, and he read an article about it, and he said, that's the smartest thing a Republican has written in 35 years. He said, if you do this, and if you run your campaign on this, he said, this is exactly what America needs.
Well, I know several people who are members of unions who hold Second Amendment rights. They are probably pro-life, but consistently
vote against Republicans. Because they think they're... I was doing this book tour last year, and I was in New York. And I was in the waiting room at Fox ready to do the Hannity show. And a guy was sitting there and said, hey, I saw your book and heard you talking about it on the radio earlier today. And he said, I really love what you're doing. He said, my best friend is a crane operator in New York. And he's in a union, right? You know, I'm talking about crane, the big high-rise cranes not a job I'd want, let's just put it that way. He says, you know how much he makes a year? I said, I don't know, 150. New York, 200,000, $350,000.
Wow.
I said, crane operator. Yeah, well, with overtime and everything.
I'm not sure that's enough for me to get up and.
He said he makes $350,000 a year. And he said, you know what? He'll never vote Republican. I said, why? He said, because you don't care about guys like him. I said, really? He said, no, you want to take his job away. And I said, well, okay. I said, well, show him this book. He said, no, that's why I want to get. He said, that's why I'm going to show him this book. He said, it'd be great if we had Republicans who are actually for working men and women.
Right. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit. I mean, still looking at economics. Obviously, a good solid tax policy is part of the package. What are you going to do to rein in government spending?
Well, first, we're going to get rid of Obamacare.
Okay.
That's number one entitlement that goes away. Number two, we need to apply the principles that I talked about with welfare reform to all other means-tested entitlement programs, food stamps, housing programs, Medicaid, and the like. There needs to be an idea that government assistance programs are there for two reasons. Number one, to support you when you fall. when things, and look, we all have problems. We all have, whether it's divorce or whether it's a child unexpected out of wedlock, or whether it's a an accident. There's all sorts of reasons why people may end up on needing some sort of government help, and I think most Americans are very, very open to that and want to be kind, and I think hopefully most Republicans feel that way too, that there needs to be a safety net, and that's a good thing in America. That's not a bad thing. The Republicans don't see safety nets as a bad thing.
Right.
But the second purpose is to help transition you back to earned success.
Okay.
Arthur Brooks wrote a book talking about the key to happiness in America. The key to happiness in our human psyche is earned success. The idea that you can provide for yourself and your family, and you can have that satisfaction of accomplishment, which leads to true happiness. And that not having success that's earned, whether you're a trust fund kid or whether you're someone who grew up on welfare, that doesn't give you the satisfaction that leads to true happiness. Whether you have lots of money that you didn't make, or whether you have very little money that someone helps you basically to survive, neither leads to happiness. And that it's actually accomplishing something, working hard, doing what's necessary to be successful that leads to that happiness. And that has to be the focus of these programs. And that's why I believe we need to put work requirements and time limits on all of these programs. And obviously, if you have a disability and you can't work, that's a different story. But once you get past that, we have to have these programs not be places that insulate people from what the real key to happiness is. And I don't look at it as, this is a punishment. This is a privilege to be able to work. It's to be able to work and do what you would, use your hands, use your head to do something, and have the opportunity to maybe take, whatever experience you have and turning that into a better job, and then turning that into a better job. All of that is what America has been all about. It's the opportunity to climb that ladder, to earn success, and to pursue your dreams. And we're not helping people by not putting them on that path. And so that's number one. With those programs, and that would, as we saw in welfare, if you can do what take food stamps, block grant it, cap the money. What we did in welfare, because it was at all-time highs when we transitioned welfare, we took the welfare money, we block granted the state, cut it by 10% because it was already at high levels. Food stamps would be in the same situation. We can cut it by at least 10%. Block granted to the states, make them have a work requirement and a time limit on the program, and then let them deal with it. And what happened with welfare reform? The rolls were cut by 50% in 3 years. Mm-hmm. Poverty levels went down.
Right.
Employment among the most hard to employ went up. All of those things work, and we have to believe in those things as Republicans and point to the success that previous programs have done. So that's one. The other big nuts, as you know, are Medicare and Social Security.
Right.
And you've probably heard me talk about this many times.
Yeah.
We need to move to a defined amount of money we're going to spend on Medicare, as opposed to the current system, which is indefinite.
Okay.
I always ask people, how much money are we going to spend next year on Medicare? And people look at me like I
have no idea.
And they said, I have no idea. I said, you know what? Nobody else does either. Now, they can guess, but they don't know. Why? Because it's an uncapped entitlement. In other words, whatever the medical bills are that seniors purchase, that's how much money Medicare costs. That's no way to run a healthcare system,
right?
Which is just an unlimited amount, however much people spend.
So what would that look, in a perfect world, if you got everything you wanted?
We'd take the amount of money that we spent on Medicare, we would divide it up per person, give them a subsidy, and say, here's the amount of money we're going to give you. Go out and here we'll have the insurance market offer a variety of different insurance products to you.
Right.
And you pick the product that serves you best. And you know what? If it's a really expensive product, then you're going to have to pay more for it. If it's a less expensive product, you may even save money. You may even take some money home. You may not use it all on that. But it says to seniors, we're going to put the power in your hands. We're going to give you choices to the plans that you want. and we're gonna have a private market that competition will drive down cost and increase efficiency. So that's called a premium support model, which is something that I've supported for a dozen or more, more than that, a dozen or more years.
Yeah, what would the transition of that look like?
I would say to seniors, particularly seniors who are older seniors, we would say that you don't have to move into that system. You can stay with the system you have right now. But I don't know of anybody under 70 years of age who hasn't had to deal with making healthcare choices, health insurance decisions. I mean, we all have. Yeah. You do. Everybody does now. And 20 years ago that wasn't the case. But today, particularly under Obamacare, everybody has to make these healthcare choices. And I remember when we talked about this premium support model. The Democrats would say, people can't make these decisions on their own. Government has to make these decisions for you. They can't make these decisions. Well, now we see very clearly that they can and they will. Right. And so, but that's not to say, particularly elderly seniors, because not all seniors are elderly in my mind. I mean, you're on Social Security at 62. You're not elderly. Right. If you're 90, my mom's not going to be 97 this month. She's elderly, right. And I'm not going to tell her she has to change her Medicare policy, right?
Right.
But for younger seniors, we'll transition them over into that new system, and of course, everybody coming in there.
Great.
Social Security is another issue. I can go into all the details of that too. But
basically, you were just talking about raising the eligibility age.
The eligibility age will go up with life expectancy. Okay. Life expectancy in America goes up about a month every 2 years,
right?
And so raise the eligibility age consistent with life expectancy, so every future generation of seniors will have the same amount of time on Social Security as the previous generation.
Right.
And that's what makes it fair. If you don't do it that way, then future generations are on longer, receive more money, which means younger generations have to pay more. Well, when they get there, they're going to be on longer. So every generation is going to end up paying more and more and more, and that's just it's not a sustainable system.
Right. One last question, along the lines of we're talking economic policy. I rarely hear anybody talk about monetary policy, but the Fed is really screwing things up. What do you think we could do to
Well, here's the problem with monetary policy, and the Fed is really screwing things up, is that most people don't see it because I was going to say something hasn't hit the fan, but the water hasn't hit the dam.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't really know how this policy is going to work as it unwinds, and I think what we've seen is that Fed policy has been to the great benefit of asset holders, stock purchasers. Markets are up, and everything from stock market to the real estate market. And because we've had this robust quantitative easing at first, and now low interest rate policies of the Fed, but savers have not done well. Folks who are just ordinary consumers, if you will, you see food prices and other prices, higher than they really need to be, right, because the Fed is fixated on making sure that we have this stable rate of inflation, and that we have these extraordinary low interest rates.
What about just the state of our dollar? I mean, it's...
Well, again, you look at the dollar today, the dollar is actually relatively strong today, and it's not because of anything the Fed has done.
Right.
It's how bad everything else everywhere it is. So it's the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and so all of that, to my point, all of that can crumbling. The dollar and inflation, a whole host of other things. When economic growth reaches a point where you start to put pressure on wages, pressure on prices, all of a sudden then the interest rates come up, the cost of borrowing of the federal government comes up, which will explode, and all of a sudden you have an economic crisis simply because the economy is growing like it normally should grow.
Right.
So in a sense, what the Fed has done is sort of artificially clamp down the economy. Yeah. And here's the problem. I went to now he's a former Fed governor, a couple of years ago, who was sort of a noted contrarian, so you probably know what I'm talking about. And I asked him, I said, look, I just need to talk to you. I said, how do you guys unwind this? I mean, you wound this thing pretty tight. How are you going to unwind it? We don't know.
Oh gosh.
I said, well, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I mean, there's lots of theories,
Yeah.
but it's never been done before. And so we don't know. And it's one of the reasons that he was so much against winding it as tight and as high as it went. And so the answer is, they can say, well, we've been greatly successful. We didn't have nearly the recession, and we didn't have really this, but we haven't paid the price yet, and we don't know when that price is going to be paid. And so it's sort of a scary thought to think about what robust growth would mean to this country when it comes to our monetary policy.
Thank you so much.
You bet.